The airport went silent the moment the officer said my name. Not loudly, not aggressively, just enough that my boarding pass trembled in my fingers. "Sir," he said, eyes locked on his screen. "Please step aside." Behind him, through the glass wall, I could see my plane taxiing toward the runway. In 3 hours, my grandfather's lawyer would open a sealed envelope that decided who inherited everything he'd built. And in that moment, I realized someone had planned for me to never be there. Fluorescent lights, cold floors, the kind of place where time feels suspended. 2 officers stand on either side of me. My carry-on bag lies open, its contents exposed like a confession. Officer Kai-2 lifts a small envelope with tweezers. "Can you explain why this was found stitched inside your bag?" I stare at it. White paper. My name written in my mother's handwriting. Inside, a customs declaration form falsified. "I didn't put that there," I say calmly. Too calmly. Officer Fei-1 tilts his head. On my phone buzzes. Mom calling. I don't answer. Gray walls. A camera in the corner. No clock. Officer I-1 slides a folder across the table. "According to this," he says, tapping the page, "your parents reported concerns about you transporting undisclosed documents related to an inheritance dispute." I laugh once, a dry, broken sound. He watches my reaction carefully. "You seem surprised." "My grandfather died 6 days ago," I say. "They told me the hearing was postponed." The officer doesn't respond. That's when it hits me. They didn't just lie, they timed it. Warm lighting, fake smiles. My father pours tea with steady hands. "No rush," he says casually. "Lawyers are slow. Focus on your work." My mother squeezes my arm. "Your grandfather would want peace in the family." I remember the way they avoided eye contact. The way my mother stitched my initials into my travel bag herself. Love sewn carefully into sabotage. I lean back in the chair. "So," I say quietly, "if I miss the hearing, what happens?" Officer Fei-1 hesitates. "Just a fraction. In inheritance law," he says, "absence can be interpreted as forfeiture." I nod slowly. Of course. The sky outside the small window is turning gray. I'm released. No charges. Misunderstanding. Too late for the flight. Too late for the hearing. My phone finally lights up with a message from my father. "Dad, it's for the best. Some things aren't meant for everyone." I stare at the screen until it goes dark. Then I open my grandfather's old voicemail, saved untouched. His voice crackles through the speaker. "If they ever stop you from coming, you'll know why. And when you do, don't fight loudly. Watch. Wait, then move." I exhale slowly. The first thing I do is in anger. It's research. Because lies like theirs always leave a trail. And I've just found the first one. The camera lingers on my face as I scroll through legal records. One familiar name appearing where it shouldn't. I spent the next few days like a ghost moving through my own life. Every corner of my apartment seemed quieter than before, every shadow longer. I retraced every step leading up to that fateful flight. Replaying conversations with my parents, noting the lies in their eyes, the almost imperceptible hesitation in their voices. It was as if they'd choreographed my absence with precision, each move calculated to keep me away from what was mine by blood. I dug into my grandfather's files, his old journals, every legal document he had left behind. There was a pattern: names, dates, signatures that didn't align. The inheritance wasn't just money, it was control, influence, power, and someone had already started claiming it before I could even step into the courtroom. I began observing my parents in a way I never had before. Their smiles were polite but hollow. Their words carefully chosen, almost rehearsed. They didn't know I had access to everything they thought was hidden. Each message, each whispered conversation I recorded secretly, piecing together a web of betrayal. The deeper I went, the more I realized this wasn't just a family dispute. It was a trap designed to humiliate me, to make me powerless. My mother's handwriting on that envelope wasn't just a mistake, it was an invitation, a challenge. And I accepted it silently, without a word. Night after night, I would sit with a single lamp on, legal files spread across the table, my laptop glowing like a window into another world. I found discrepancies in trust funds, forged signatures, hidden bank accounts. Every discovery fueled a growing fire inside me. The calm patience I had honed over years of discipline now became my weapon. There was no room for rash decisions. Every move had to be precise, like a chess game where the wrong step would cost everything. I thought about the plane, the security officer, the empty gate waiting for me. They had underestimated my patience, thinking absence would mean defeat. But patience was the tool of the calculated avenger. I started watching them more closely in public, noting their patterns, the places they went, the people they interacted with. My father met with a lawyer almost daily. My mother attended social gatherings with a practiced smile that hid suspicion. They were confident, but I could see the cracks. Every whisper they exchanged in the corners of rooms, every glance over a shoulder, spoke volumes to me. I began taking photographs, noting times, locations, and conversations. Each detail was a thread in the web I was weaving, invisible to anyone but me. I learned that power wasn't just in documents or accounts, it was in perception, manipulation, control, and I intended to reclaim it all silently, without anyone suspecting. Sleep became a luxury. Every night I reviewed my plan, checking every detail, recalculating every risk. I created false trails to test their reactions, sending subtle messages that hinted I knew more than I did. They flinched at times, revealing the fear I needed to see. Fear wasn't loud, it was quiet, lingering, almost invisible. And yet, it gave me satisfaction. I realized revenge wasn't about anger. It was about observation, control, and timing. Every move I made, every piece of evidence I gathered, was preparation. I didn't want just victory. I wanted them to understand the magnitude of what they had attempted to do. One evening, I received an anonymous tip. A letter slipped under my door. No signature, no explanation, just a photograph of my grandfather smiling. And a note knew they would try. He also knew you would rise. My heart pounded. Someone else knew, someone outside the family. Was it a friend of my grandfather, a lawyer, or someone else entirely? The note gave me clarity. I wasn't alone. And for the first time since that airport, I felt the balance shifting. I wasn't just reacting, I was becoming proactive, a shadow moving among people who thought they were untouchable. I began reaching out to old contacts of my grandfather, people who owed him loyalty, respect, fear. They didn't ask questions, they listened. They provided insights I could never have gotten alone. Financial accounts hidden in other countries, shell corporations, and business partners who could be swayed. Each revelation became ammunition. Each piece of information was another step toward reclaiming what was mine. But I moved like a ghost, invisible, careful. No one suspected. No one ever suspects the quiet storm gathering in the silence. Then came the first direct confrontation. My mother called under the guise of concern, asking me to meet for dinner. I agreed, letting her think I was naive, compliant. When I arrived, her eyes flickered with suspicion. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. We sat across from each other, pretending. Conversation was light, trivial. But I noted every word, every hesitation, every twitch. It was a dance. I asked innocuous questions about family matters, pretending ignorance. She gave answers designed to mislead, to test me. But I had already anticipated this. I smiled politely, asked one or two follow-ups, and left. Outside, I felt the first real surge of power since the airport. They had underestimated me completely. The days that followed were a series of small victories. I exposed one forged document after another, contacting banks under false pretenses to confirm transactions, subtly creating alarms that would eventually draw attention. I planted doubts among business partners, creating a ripple of uncertainty. Each move was careful, calculated, patient. I never lost my composure. Anger was useless, subtlety was lethal. Every reaction I provoked in them brought me closer to the moment of truth. And yet, I still did not act fully. The ending would come only when I chose, and I could feel the tension building like a rope being stretched to its limit. Late one night, I walked past my father's office building, watching from the shadows. He left unaware, and I noted his rote, his timing, and the security patterns. Small details but crucial. This was more than revenge. It was a reclamation of power. Every lie he had told, every manipulation, every moment he had controlled would be mirrored back to him. But silence remained my greatest ally. I never revealed my awareness. My restraint made my eventual strike inevitable, and all the more devastating. Patience was my weapon, observation my shield, and the world outside remained oblivious. I spent hours analyzing their assets, their schedules, their allies. Each piece fit into a larger puzzle, a puzzle that only I could complete. I reached into old legal loopholes, contracts, and settlements. Slowly, meticulously, I began orchestrating a network of influence and leverage. No one suspected. I moved like a shadow, preparing the stage for a revelation so precise, so perfectly timed, that it would leave them reeling. The airport, the missed hearing, the lies, it was all the beginning. The prologue to a story they didn't even realize I was writing. Even in my solitude, I felt the weight of what was coming. This wasn't just revenge, it was justice in its most refined, coldest form. I imagined the confrontation in my mind, the subtle exposure of their deception, the unraveling of their carefully crafted facades. It wasn't about shouting or confrontation, it was about control. It was about showing them, without words, the power they had tried to steal from me. Each night, as I sat in darkness with only the lamp illuminating the documents before me, I felt the inevitability of the final act. It would come. I just had to wait for the perfect moment. And now, every call, every meeting, every casual interaction is a move on a chessboard only I can see. They walk through life believing they are safe, unaware of the storm gathering quietly around them. The seed of revenge has been planted, nurtured by patience, watered with observation, and strengthened by the discipline I've honed. Soon every lie, every betrayal, every attempt to manipulate me will come crashing back. But not yet. Not until the timing is perfect, until the trap is set so flawlessly that escape is impossible. I wait, I watch, and I prepare. The waiting changed me. Not in a dramatic way, no sudden hardness, no visible scars, but in the quiet rearrangement of priorities. I stopped answering calls unless necessary. I let messages sit unread just long enough to create doubt. I learned how silence unsettles people more than confrontation ever could. My parents began reaching out more frequently, their concern growing less convincing with each attempt. My mother's voice would soften artificially, asking if I was eating well, if work was stressful. My father would offer help I didn't ask for. They were probing, measuring how much I knew. I gave them nothing. The less I said, the more they revealed. I attended a charity gala they were hosting, blending into the background like an afterthought. The room was full of polished smiles and quiet deals, crystal glasses clinking under chandeliers. I watched my parents work the room with practiced ease, shaking hands, laughing at jokes that weren't funny. I noticed who stayed close to them and who kept a cautious distance. Power leaves a scent, and fear does too. I caught fragments of conversation, whispers about trusts being restructured, about legal complications handled discreetly. They didn't see me listening, they never had. Later that night, I followed one of my grandfather's former associates out to the parking lot. He was older now, slower, but his eyes still held the sharpness of a man who understood leverage. I didn't threaten him, I didn't need to. I simply mentioned a document my grandfather had signed decades ago, one my parents believed had been destroyed. The color drained from his face. He invited me into his car, voice shaking as he explained what had really happened after my grandfather's health declined. Names were exchanged. Dates confirmed, the story became clearer, darker. My absence from the hearing wasn't a contingency, it was the plan. The more I learned, the more carefully I moved. I began redirecting funds quietly, freezing accounts under the guise of compliance checks, creating delays that forced explanations. Each action was legal, just barely. Enough to frustrate, not enough to expose me. I wanted them uneasy, not alerted. At night I replayed my grandfather's voicemail again and again, dissecting his words. He had known. He had trusted me to finish what he couldn't. That trust weighed heavier than any anger I felt. My parents' behavior shifted. My mother grew sharper, her patience thinning. My father started canceling meetings, avoiding certain people. They sensed the ground moving beneath them but couldn't see why. One afternoon, I received an email from their lawyer requesting a family discussion. To settle misunderstandings, I ignored it. The following day, a second email arrived, more formal, less polite. I smiled. Pressure reveals intent. I staged a small misstep on purpose. A document leaked to a junior associate suggesting irregularities in the trust's administration. It was enough to spark rumors, but not enough to point back to me. Within hours, phones were ringing. Meetings were rescheduled. My parents scrambled to contain something they didn't fully understand. That night, my father showed up unannounced at my apartment. He stood in the doorway, eyes scanning the room as if searching for evidence of my awareness. "You should be careful," he said quietly. "There are things you don't understand." He hesitated, just long enough. "Legal processes can be unforgiving. So can lies," I replied evenly. He left shortly after, unsettled. I closed the door and exhaled slowly. He knew now. Not everything, but enough to be afraid. From that point on, the balance tipped. I accelerated certain steps, tightening the net while maintaining the illusion of distance. I met privately with a judge my grandfather had once helped during a difficult campaign. I didn't ask for favors. I asked for clarity. He gave it to me carefully, reminding me how fragile reputations can be when exposed to daylight. I met with a forensic accountant who specialized in unraveling complex financial knots. She didn't ask why. She didn't need to. The evidence spoke loudly enough. My mother called again, this time without pretense. Her voice trembled as she accused me of undermining the family, of disrespecting my grandfather's legacy. I let her talk. When she finished, I said only one thing. "You should have let me get on that plane." The line went dead. Sleep came easier after that. Not because the weight had lifted, but because the path forward was finally clear. I no longer questioned my timing. Everything was aligning piece by piece. The people who had benefited from my absence were now trapped by my presence, quiet, informed, and relentless. I attended meetings as an observer, never the focal point, letting others underestimate me. Underestimation is a gift. I accepted it gladly. The night before a critical audit, I sat alone reviewing the final set of documents. They told a story of greed layered over fear, of betrayal disguised as protection. I imagined my parents reading the same pages, realizing too late that their careful planning had overlooked one variable: me. Outside, the city hummed, unaware of the reckoning inching closer. I closed the folder gently, as if not to disturb the moment. In the following days, subpoenas were drafted, accounts flagged, partners distanced themselves. My parents' social circle began to thin, invitations quietly withdrawn. They noticed. Of course they did. Power is lonely when it starts to slip. My father tried calling again. I let it ring. My mother sent a long message filled with explanations that explained nothing. I archived it. I stood once more at the airport weeks later, watching planes depart through the glass. This time I wasn't travel, I was remembering. The moment of interruption, the way control had been taken from me so casually. I didn't feel anger anymore, only resolve. What was coming wasn't impulsive or emotional. It was inevitable. Everything was in place now. The evidence, the witnesses, the timing, all that remained was the moment when silence would break, not with noise, but with consequences. I turned away from the window, my reflection faint in the glass, and walked back into the city, carrying with me the certainty that the story was approaching its most dangerous point. Not the end, not yet. Just the moment where truth begins to surface, and no one can stop it. The closer everything came to exposure, the quieter I became. It was counterintuitive, almost unnatural, but silence was now my most effective disguise. I let the systems I had set in motion do their work without interference. Auditors requested clarifications. Banks froze transfers pending verification. Board members asked uncomfortable questions behind closed doors. None of it traced back to me, and that was intentional. I wanted my parents to feel surrounded by consequences without seeing the hand that guided them there. Fear works best when it has no clear target. I attended a private meeting arranged by one of my grandfather's oldest partners. A man who had outlived most of his rivals by knowing when to speak and when to listen. His office smelled of old books and polished wood, the kind of place where decisions had been made quietly for decades. He didn't greet me warmly. He studied me instead, as if measuring whether I was ready for what came next. When he finally spoke, his words were careful. He confirmed what I already suspected: the inheritance hearing hadn't merely been about assets. It had been about authority. Whoever controlled the estate controlled several dormant contracts that were about to become extremely valuable. My parents hadn't just tried to cut me out, they had tried to erase me. That night, I walked through streets I'd known since childhood, seeing them differently now. Every familiar corner felt altered, as if the city itself had shifted in response to what I knew. I passed the house where my parents still lived. Lights on in the upper floor, I imagined them inside, pacing, whispering, recalculating. For the first time, I felt something close to satisfaction, not triumph, not joy, but the calm certainty that the imbalance was correcting itself slowly. Precisely, the next phase required visibility, but only enough to suggest vulnerability. I allowed a rumor to surface that I was financially strained, that the missed inheritance had hurt me more than I let on. It spread faster than expected. Sympathy is a useful mask. People began offering advice, introductions, small opportunities I accepted selectively, building relationships that appeared accidental but served my larger purpose. Each conversation gave me leverage. Each connection added weight to the pressure already closing in on my parents. My father finally requested a meeting directly. No intermediaries, no lawyers, just us. He chose a neutral place, a quiet cafe far from our usual circles. When I arrived, he was already there, stirring his coffee long after the sugar had dissolved. He looked older. Tired. For a moment, I wondered if he regretted what he'd done. Then I remembered the envelope stitched into my bag, the precise cruelty of it. The doubt vanished. You're being reckless, he said without greeting. You don't understand how much damage this could cause. I sat across from him, unhurried. I understand exactly how much damage has already been done. His jaw tightened. You're making enemies you don't need. I didn't choose this, I replied quietly. You did. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. We did what we had to. You were never meant to handle that kind of responsibility. There it was. Not concern, not fear, contempt thinly veiled. I held his gaze until he looked away first. When I stood to leave, I said only one thing. You should start preparing for questions. His hand froze around the cup. From that point on, the unraveling accelerated. Investigators requested interviews. Documents were subpoenaed. A junior executive, one I'd quietly ensured, felt abandoned, agreed to cooperate in exchange for leniency. My parents' defenses shifted from confidence to denial. They blamed advisors, partners, circumstances. The truth pressed closer, undeniable. Patient, I stayed invisible, my name appearing nowhere official. My presence felt only in the tightening space they had to maneuver. I revisited my grandfather's house late one evening, using a key he'd given me years ago. Dust covered most surfaces, but his study remained untouched, preserved like a shrine. I sat at his desk, running my fingers over the worn leather, imagining him there waiting. In a hidden drawer, I found a letter addressed to me. He must have written it knowing this moment would come. He didn't apologize for what he'd foreseen. He simply explained why he trusted me more than anyone else, because I listened more than I spoke. Because I understood patience. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back where it belonged. The pressure finally broke in public. A business journal published an article questioning the management of the estate, citing anonymous sources and ongoing investigations. My parents' names were printed in bold. Phones rang nonstop, meetings were canceled outright, invitations disappeared. Their world, once insulated by reputation, was now exposed to scrutiny. I watched from a distance as the narrative shifted, as allies quietly stepped away. Isolation has a way of clarifying reality. My mother called late that night. Her voice was different now, no control, no artifice. Just fear. She asked me to come home, said we needed to talk as a family. I agreed, not because I wanted reconciliation, but because timing matters. When I arrived, the house felt smaller, darker. They sat across from me at the same dining table where they had once smiled and lied. This time, there were no smiles. We can fix this, my mother said, if you help us. I looked at them both, seeing them not as parents but as architects of their own downfall. You already fixed it, I said. Just not the way you planned. My father slammed his hand on the table, anger finally breaking through fear. You think you've won? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The silence did the work for me. When I left, I knew we were approaching the point of no return. Everything that could be set in motion was already moving. The truth no longer needed my guidance. It was self-sustaining now. I returned to my apartment and reviewed the final sequence of events, hearings scheduled, statements prepared, evidence cataloged. Each step had been placed exactly where it belonged. There was no chaos, only order, enforced slowly. As dawn approached, I stood by the window watching the city wake up, feeling neither relief nor triumph. What lay ahead would change everything: names, legacies, histories rewritten under the weight of facts. But the final act was still mine to initiate. I hadn't spoken the last word. I hadn't revealed the one piece of information that would collapse every remaining defense. That moment was coming, not yet. But soon, and when it did, there would be no room left for denial, no shadow deep enough to hide in. Only the truth laid bare and the consequences that follow it. The final move didn't arrive with drama or raised voices. It arrived on letterhead stamped indexed and impossible to ignore. The hearing that replaced the one I'd missed was scheduled quietly, framed as a compliance review triggered by irregularities, no spectacle, no audience. I attended without announcing myself, taking a seat where my parents couldn't see me at first. When the chair opened the session, the room felt smaller, the air heavier, as if truth carried mass. The forensic accountant spoke first, her voice steady as she laid out the numbers, the shell structures, the dates that overlapped with my grandfather's decline. Then the cooperating executive testified, hands shaking as he confirmed instructions he'd received, signatures he'd been told to route, silences he'd been paid to keep. I watched my parents' posture change in increments, confidence folding into rigidity, rigidity into something brittle. When my name finally appeared, when the chair asked if the interested party wished to be heard, I stood, not with a speech rehearsed for victory, but with a single document placed gently on the table, my grandfather's letter, notarized, cross-referenced, its contingencies activated only if I were prevented from attending the original hearing. The room shifted. There are moments when power transfers without sound, when everyone senses it at once. This was one of them. The chair read aloud the clause my parents had never found, the one that redirected authority upon proof of interference, and as the word settled, the last defense collapsed. Objections followed, frantic and procedural, but they were late. The findings were entered, the controls reassigned, the accounts unfrozen under new management. Mine not as punishment but as correction. The law's way of restoring shape to something distorted, outside. My parents tried to speak to me, but there was nothing left to say. I didn't take satisfaction in their silence. I took responsibility for what followed. I met with partners my grandfather had trusted and told them the truth without embellishment. I stabilized what had been shaken, honored contracts that deserved honoring, dissolved the ones that thrived on opacity. The press cycle came and went, names rose and fell, narratives simplified for public consumption, but I stayed out of it, refusing interviews, letting outcomes speak. In private, I closed doors I had no intention of reopening. I changed my number. I sold the apartment where the waiting had reshaped me and moved into my grandfather's old house, restoring it not as a monument but as a workspace. The study returned to use, the desk worn smooth by continuity. On a quiet evening weeks later, I stood once more at the airport, not to travel but to remember the moment when control had been taken from me, and how easily it had been returned by patience. Planes lifted and disappeared into cloud. Indifferent to personal reckonings, I didn't feel lighter or heavier, just aligned. Revenge had never been the point, not really reclamation was. I reclaimed my place, my name, the authority my absence had been meant to erase, and I did it without noise, without spectacle, without becoming what had tried to break me. When I finally played my grandfather's voicemail again, I didn't need to listen past the first sentence. I already knew how the story ended. Not with punishment shouted from rooftops but with truth set down carefully, like a weight placed exactly where it belongs, restoring balance by its mere presence. And as the city settled into night beyond the window, I turned off the lamp, closed the file, and let the quiet be complete.